One of the stories that came out of that courtroom yesterday was the interrogation of Russell Williams. Here's Williams with Detective Sergeant Jim Smith of the OPP.
Any point today you feel the need, you want to speak to a lawyer, you let me know, and we can take you to a room where you can do that in private, okay?
Okay.
Do you have your own lawyer?
I have a realty lawyer, but
okay.
No, I don't have a lawyer.
All right. If at any point you want to make that call and you don't know who to call, we have a phone list of lawyers.
That's the beginning of the interrogation. Detective Sergeant Jim Smith interrogating Colonel Russell Williams. For his thoughts on that interrogation, how it unfolded, as I mentioned, it was fascinating to watch, and the steps that officers take to get the most out of somebody in that interrogation room. We've reached Dave Perry. He's a former detective with Toronto Police. He worked in the sex crimes unit, also in homicide, where he co-managed the investigation into the murder of Holly Jones. He's now a private security consultant and is on the line with us now. Dave Perry, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
What are your impressions of the approach used in the interrogation of Colonel Russell Williams?
Well, Jim Smith used some very standard modern-day techniques for interrogation, and we're actually moving away from the word interrogation these days because it conjures up, what people see on television on a regular basis. And what we do nowadays is, as you saw, a rapport-based system where we talk to people on a very calm level and maintain control of the interview that way using various techniques. And I thought that this one was fairly typical of the way we do interrogations today.
So is that the word that's used now, interview?
Well, it depends. I mean, the system that I teach is very similar to the one you saw applied against Williams, and it's a rapport-based system. I don't really call it interrogation because, again, some people, and even in the courts, they kind of look at that as oppressive and aggressive tactics, and clearly we don't use those tactics in situations like this. And so I teach, an interview process that involves confession techniques, and what I call it rather than interrogation is an involvement challenge, where you're directing questions towards guilt, towards the individual, and testing for their responses. So, a lot different than what people traditionally think of an interrogation.
The tone is fascinating in watching this again. It's horrifying knowing what this man has done, and yet watching the officer in that room try and lead him along was really interesting, in part because it starts off with a sort of I'm your friend kind of tone.
Absolutely, and that's the goal of a good interviewer going in, to make sure that you make some kind of a connection with the person that you're interviewing, and you show respect, and he even said it, I'm going to treat you with respect, and I'd like you to do the same for me. Talk about things that you have in common, develop some common grounds, and I would suggest by the end of the hours of interviewing that took place there, that Williams psychologically felt that the only friend that he had in the world was Detective Sergeant Smith, and that was a good strategy.
How do you choose to deploy bits of evidence over the course of those hours? Because, again, there's a very gradual drip in terms of what you know, what the investigators know, and how you reveal that to the suspect in the room.
Well, most liars come into an interview with one basic lie, and once you defeat that, things start to unravel quite quickly. Now, with Williams, there was a lot of talking, a lot of, denials of knowledge of people and so on. And you've got to allow them an opportunity to get all that denial out. And then you can turn it around and use it as ammunition to fire back at them when you're doing your questioning and your evidence presentation. What I liked about this particular interview was the fact that it came sort of in pieces, and that's a good way of doing it. Initially talking about the tire tracks and about the footwear impressions, and the fact that he knew, as well as the detective sergeant knew, that he was at that house. And when Williams tried to say, well, I don't know what to say about that, the interviewer didn't allow him to go down that denial road, and instead started piling more evidence on the table. And that overwhelming forensic presentation is a really good technique at the right time to get people to confess.
How much of that is about reading body language? Because if you watch the video of Williams, you saw his shoulders slump, you saw his head go down, and you saw that he looked like a defeated man.
Yeah, a good interviewer is always watching and paying attention to body language, and sometimes asking certain questions, looking for what might be a typical response non-verbally, but more importantly, looking at what people say, how they say it, and just as important, what they don't say during an interview. So we look at what's normal in terms of responses, and we look at what's abnormal. For example, what's abnormal? Early in the interview, Williams told the interviewer that, and he corrected the interviewer, saying that the one person lived 3 doors down from him, not 2. But what I found interesting is you study his body language and even the way he said it, there was no emotional attachment to it whatsoever. And we all know, and you just have to think, put yourself in the shoes of an innocent person who has a murder take place 3 doors away. I think you'd have a lot to say if you were innocent, and the opposite showed through on this particular interview. No emotional attachment to it whatsoever.
Very briefly, how difficult is it to be restrained in the course of this? Because I know that you have to remain emotionally detached as well, but to watch this gradually unfold, there's a real sense that this is an art and you're trying to tease this out and you know at some point in time this is about to happen.
Right, and you know what, it takes a little bit of time and experience and training to get yourself to do that. Typically, natural human response to lying is to respond back very quickly and to eventually engage in sort of a rapid-fire question and answer session. And what we train ourselves is to do exactly the opposite of what people would normally do. When somebody's lying to us in an interview, what we like to do is slow down, pause, use all kinds of other techniques to allow the person to talk, to get all that, denial out on the table, and then to systematically start tearing it apart.
It is an art and indeed a science. Dave Perry, thank you for walking us through it.
My pleasure.